Welcome to another Coffee with Samso, where we speak with ASX companies and the guys who lead these companies about what's the story is. We've got Cyprium Metals Limited back with us today. The ASX code is CYM. Market cap as we speak is around 46 million and the share price about 6.3 cents. So we're back here at the University Club in Crawley on the University of Western Australia campus. And I got Mr. Barry Cahill back, the man from the Copper Man. Cyprium is about the Nifty Copper project. You know, I think the numbers are total of 940,000 tonnes of contained copper, about right?
Yep.
And I'll leave it with Barry. Welcome back to us, and maybe just give us a recap of Cyprium.
No worries. Thanks for the opportunity. Basically, Cyprium was formed in June of 2019 with a view to creating a mid-tier copper company, and we basically transacted a joint venture project at Hollandair where we've got a 50,000 tonne resource, and then in 2020 we transacted Nifty Well, which is also in the Murchison, where we've now got 160,000 tonnes of copper metal. Which forms our Murchison project, which is about 200,000 tonne of copper metal. And then in April of last year, 2021, we transacted the copper assets of Metals X. We got hold of the Nifty Copper project, which is on care and maintenance since November of 2019, and we've got 60 kilometres to the south, the Maroochydore copper cobalt deposit, which is about 480,000 tonnes of copper. And then around the outside of all that, in the exploration tenements, there's a joint venture with Independence Group where they're spending 32 million over 6.5 odd years exploring those tenements on our behalf. At the moment, I think they've spent about 6 or 7 million. So when you look at our progress, our total contained copper in resource at the moment is 1.6 million tonnes of copper, which is pretty substantial. In 3 projects, 1 development ready and the other 2 resources. In fact, all our projects got resources. All our projects are open either along strike or at depth. And that really was part of our strategy when we started in June 2019, because as I said, we want to be a mid-tier copper producer. But also, more importantly than that, we wanted to be a copper cathode producer. So when we targeted projects, we're sort of targeting that heap leach SXEW potential, because in previous projects we'd operated, we'd seen that, we'd seen the advantage commercially of producing copper cathode on site, and how basically, you know, it can be more profitable to do that than say to produce a concentrate and ship it to a smelter overseas. And as I say, in 3 years that, or 3 and a bit years that we've been around, we've now probably one of the biggest junior copper developers on the market. I mean, in fact, Nifty is like 6th ranked by size and grade of copper development projects in Australia. Maroochydore is 8th ranked. And here we are, this tiny little minnow, having those projects and getting the start line. And really that's our strategy. So over the next 5 to 10 years, we want to try and build Nifty, Maroochydore, Nifty Well, Project 4, Project 5, get ourselves up to 100,000 tonne of copper and be a mid-tier copper producer. That's always been the strategy. And so far, we're pretty well on track to achieve all that. Our strategy, either by good luck or good management, seems to be working quite well. So that's a little recap of what we've done and what we've achieved in terms of Cyprium Metals. If you have a look at where we are, I'll just talk about the other projects because it's quite interesting. Because we've been focused on Nifty, we've been doing work on the other projects, but as everyone knows in the market at the moment, so, you know, receipt of data and assays and drilling and all that sort of stuff's very slow. Manpower is difficult to get, so we sort of focus pretty well extensively on Nifty. The data's been accumulating, there's a bit of a backlog behind us, and now we're in a finance process with Nifty. It's freed a few people up to do some more work around those other projects. There's been some really good work done at Maroochydore, which we haven't released to the market as of yet. We're going through a process of going through the data. We've got to update the resource. Our geologists have been doing a lot of work on the data set they've got and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully they can get onto that in the short term and bring some information out about that. But as I said, it's already a 480,000 tonne copper resource with cobalt, 60 k's south of Nifty, so it's reasonably close to where we are, and really bullish about it. And having been to the site myself, the size of it's what sort of catches the eye. There's like this 3 kilometre strike. It's an amazing ore body. And then Nunardi Well and the Murchison project, we put out a release 3 days ago.
That's right.
And it's really intriguing because Nunardi Well is this magmatic copper deposit. It's got copper, background nickel, gold, silver. Crackle breccia goes through it with really high silver grades. There's some pegmatite that goes through it as intrusives. There's zinc and lead and PGEs and all sorts of things in that sort of system. And as I said, we've got a 160,000 tonne of copper resource there. It's still open along strike and open to the depth. And what we did over the last 2 years really is we drilled it. We've developed a inferred resource. It's still not closed it off, and then concurrently with that, we've done some more work to the east and we've done some more work to the north. And what those results show us that we put out in the market, which is really interesting, is that we've still got anomalous copper a few kilometres to the north of Nunardi Well, which means it's still open that way because we've still got this anomalous copper. And then to the east, we've now got this broad anomalous horizon of copper nickel PGEs. And what it's done, it's opened up 10 kilometres of basal contact. So when we look at Nunardi Well as a project, it is a reasonably large system, and we've always seen it as a development project, and that's really what it's shown up to be. So when you have a look at it, you've got this resource base that's open that you can develop into a project, and then off to the east you've got this other potential. So it almost becomes almost like which is what we like, because Nifty, Maroochydore and the Patterson's like a regional play, almost becomes like a regional play for us. So that's really good. But you know, as we're focusing on Nifty, that sort of project, we only just kick it along, just keep working it up until Nifty's mining and Nifty's making cash, and then we can put the money to both Maroochydore and to Nunardi Well. So that's why when you look at the business that we've got, we sort of park them to one side, and we don't talk about it too much. But then if we do that, we park that to the side. If we're an explorer who just owned Nunardi Well or Maroochydore by itself, we'd be raving on about how good they were probably. But we just park them to the side because the focus for us is Nifty. We got hold of Nifty, took charge in April last year, so not that long ago. And funnily, some people have a short memory. There's projects been out there running studies and all sorts of things for tens of years, you know, and we've had something for 18 months, and here we are in a finance process, and we get beaten over the head because it takes longer than expected. But that's the market, unfortunately. And as we had a discussion before, the market over the last couple of years has been up here and everyone's riding this crest of a wave, and then it takes a dump, which, you know, for those of us who, we won't talk about our age, but have been in the market for decades, we've seen this before, you know, like we just see...
That's the norm, right?
That's the norm. So we've come out of the crest of this wave and everyone's very bullish, and then it hits a bear market and things become slower. And sometimes a bit more difficult, but when we've got a robust project, it's not so difficult. It's when your project's not so robust, it becomes difficult. But Nifty's a good project. So when we look at what we've achieved, we've taken charge, we've cleaned it up. As we've pointed out, there was a few historical issues there that we've rectified and resolved and got rid of scrap, and that's ongoing at the moment. We've done good refurbishment on the camp. We've done some good work around the SXEW, the offices and all of that, the power station, so and got our operational readiness going. So we've basically got the project up to the line, ready to go. If we take another step, we start to get into massive investment like civil construction, concrete, all those sorts of things. So we can't take that step until we're financed. the technical guys and everyone involved produced a restart study, which we put out in March. Very, very robust study. The Aussie dollar copper price at that stage that we used is today still less than the Aussie dollar copper price that we've got today. So in terms of the robustness of the project, it's still as robust as it ever was. And what's happening, and again, the market looks at US dollar copper price, which is important. I don't deny that. But when you look at Nifty as a heap leach SXEW, there's not a lot of US dollar inputs. It's not like we're taking concentrate to another country and we're paying smelter charges, treatment charges and freight in US dollar terms. So it's mainly Aussie dollars. So Aussie dollars is the currency of denomination, and the Aussie dollars acted as a hedge against falling copper price. So in Aussie dollar terms, you can see we've maintained, and you can see the graph, the Aussie dollar was well above where the study was, it dropped off and then it's come back up. So in Aussie dollar terms, the project's as robust as it ever was. And the other key behind the project and the restart study, and again, I think because I've been doing quite a few meetings in recent times, one of the things I think that is not understood is that the restart study was produced to finance the project. It's not a life of mine study, and it was never intended to be. And people say to me, oh, why not? Well, why go to the expense of producing a life of mine study on material that's going to be mined in 20 years? It makes no sense to spend all that money now when you're going to go to a finance process. So you go to a finance process with a study that is sufficient to finance the project, because once the finance is paid off, you own the project, and the rest of the 20-year life's yours. So we did a study that basically met that criteria. So we've got a 6.5 year study, very profitable. Over time since that study, as you can see in the market, we've added to the resource. So the actual reality of the mine life on that oxide study, that phase 1 study's got longer. And we're currently redoing the resource on some other material. The oxide resource is still not closed off, so we expect the life of the phase 1 oxide to go further. And then underneath that, you've got 700,000 tonnes of sulphide copper. And you know, you could start digging it this year and put it through that concentrator and sell to a smelter tomorrow, you know. So that project will go, you know, 10 years phase 1, 20 years sulphide, and the ore body's not closed off. So we'll see that it'll go longer and longer. So the restart study, what we've got to be clear on, is about financing the project so we own it, and then we get on with it. Approvals. So we've been through all the environmental approval process. The last approval came through on the 10th of October. So we're fully approved, ready to go. The only approval we need is a state agreement amendment proposal, which basically we would get after finance, because once we get that approval, we have to start work. You can't delay because it's a state agreement. So we've basically got to do that proposal last. But even without that proposal, if we want to start work on the footprint as it exists today, so you know, refurbishing SXEWs, refurbishing pumps and pipes and things like that, we could start. We've got all the approvals to do it. We've got EPA works approval, we've got Mines Department mining proposal approval, we've got the native vegetation clearing permits, we've got the water extraction permits. So everything's permitted, ready to go. Project management plan. So there we are, everything is up at the start line and we're ready to go, and we're basically now in a finance process. And the finance process has been interesting, I must say, because as soon as we started the finance process, the market took that dive. And then companies, when the market's like it is, companies start to get wary and it becomes more difficult. But fundamentally, the process is now continuing. We've had an extensive data room open. We've got independent reports, cash flow models, all those sorts of things. The potential financiers are working through that. Lawyers are back and forth on documents. And the question always is, well, how long does it take? And because it's taking longer than expected, we can't give a time when it will be finished. It will be finished when it's finished. And the reason for that is it's outside our control. And I think, again, that's where it's not understood. The only way I can get the finance done, it's like, what do? I rob a bank? That's the only way you can get it done in your time, is you pull out a gun and you go and rob a bank, right? So you get your finance done by robbing a bank. People will lend you their money when they're satisfied and they want to lend you the money. And really, that's really what's happening. And as we discussed, it's this market like this, so when you're on this bit, it gets a bit more difficult. So really that's where we are, and we really as a business need to just reflect about how far we have advanced, because we've advanced a long way in a very, 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 very short time.
I think that's sorry to interrupt, but I think that's the key. I mean, from an investor point of view, from what we see, I mean, I've had this discussion where I'm saying, apart from the big guys, who's the next guy? And first one I come to is Cyprium. Then I really can't think of anybody else out there at this level. And I think even you reminded me that you've come a long way in 18 months, right? From a care maintenance project to where you are, where you're looking at financing. And as we say, this is the normal aspect of any project is it's a marathon, and marathon takes a long time. And timing is such that when you guys are ready to do financing, the world decides to tighten their belt. But you're not the only one that's ever gone through this, right? This is test of time and lots of projects. But from the upside, when you look at it, right, BHP's taken out Oz Minerals. They don't exist anymore. The next tier down is, I'm not sure who this next tier would be. I suspect would be someone like yourself. That's because I think Cyprium has posed one thing, as you've mentioned, that you've got Maroochydore and things like that. And when you look at the resource, Maroochydore is actually a lot of oxides, less sulfides, which means that, well, great, you got oxides, but also means that they haven't really looked much, because everyone keeps telling me, copper is where you see copper, and whereas Nifty's had the longer history, obviously more sulfides than oxides. How do you explain to guys? Because you just told me you've got that had a meeting with 1-to-1, lots of people talking to you. How's that been transferred or received and transferred back to you?
Most of the new investors I talk, or new potential investors I talk to, can't believe our resource base and the capacity of what we've done. A lot of them can't believe we've got such a big landholding in the Paterson province, which we have. It's like we're right in the middle.
You could be an Oz, right, in some degree, right?
A
smaller version, you want to call that?
Yeah, well, that's the aim, because really you want to get into that mid-tier. So ultimately you want to be about 100,000 tonne of copper, which will put you into that mid-tier phase. But in the conversations that I've had, if you want to be in that mid-tier phase, and I know it's sort of a rehashed narrative about tier 1, but everything's in WA, so tier 1 on sovereign risk. A mine site that's operated before, so all the environmental approvals and all the things that go with that, so that's stable. And we're in a tier 1 copper province, and we dominate the middle of it. And we've got 2 big resource bases there. And as I say, it sort of befuddles me a bit about how we're received, because what we said was we're going to go and develop and we're going to become a copper producer, which is what we're going to do. But now we're penalised for it. But isn't that what everyone's trying to do?
Yeah.
Or are you telling me that everyone's out there drilling holes and building big resource bases and not intend to do anything with it? Is that what you're telling me? So this is why our strategy and our determination is what it is. Because in these cycles, as we know, there's 20 or 30 companies, 2 or 3 of them get going, the rest fall away. And then in 5 years' time, as you say, like the 2 or 3 that get going, they might be an Oz Minerals, they might be MMG, they might be something like that. The rest of them are going back to the market for money, trying to do the same thing. And we see that time and time again with copper. I mean, we reviewed 250 copper projects in Australia. There's 250 copper projects in Australia, and I can tell you very few of them are producing. So that was our strategy all along, and as I've been told, and as people are saying to me, it's like, how did you get the position? How do you get to the position that you're in so quickly? And I can tell you that we just keep working as hard as we can, because we know if we keep working as hard as we can, we'll get to the end point at the end. And that's really all we've done. And we're builders, we're constructors and developers. We don't want to be in a finance process. We don't want to be drilling 1,000-metre holes looking for, big ore bodies. That's not our skill set.
Because speaking of skill sets, I think a lot of people look at projects and they don't understand the team. But I think one of the thing that sold me on Cyprium was the fact that you guys have done this before, and you haven't just, as they say, a new kid on the block, right? This is almost stuff that you could do in your sleep, as they say.
Yeah, well, it's easier. So again, I don't think it's understood that the previous job we did in eastern Indonesia was on a remote island, sea access only, mountainous terrain and monsoonal rain. The actual plant that we expanded and refurbished was the Wim Creek plant, which is the sister plant to the Nifty plant. So those two plants were built at 16,000 tonne per annum, copper cathode. The Nifty plant was expanded to 25,000 tonnes, so that bit has already been done for us. Whereas the Wim Creek was taken over to Indonesia and we expanded it to 25,000 tonne, exactly the same plant. But we also made a number of modifications because older plants, technology changes, and we had a few issues with it which we resolved and made modifications, and we've taken that knowledge into the Nifty plant, and the same engineering guys have just walked in and said, right, we need to change that, we need to fix that, that's what we need, that we've got to get a new one of them, and away it went. And again, I don't think the market, again, understands that. So you've got a plant on a site that's produced 200,000 tonne of copper metal, so it works. And then you've got a crew that come in who have actually modified and corrected and fixed up the same plant and who have actually run a heap leach. And again, I don't think the market gives us credit for that either. And as I keep saying, what are we in the market for? We're in the market to build projects and produce copper metal plate and make money. That's why we're there. We're not there for any other reason. And again, getting on to some other things about Nifty, you produce copper metal plate on site. So finished product. So there's a commercial benefit for there because I'm not paying smelter charges, refining charges, no deleterious elements, no loss on precious metals. Gas power, gas pipeline, and as we know, domestic tariff of gas in Western Australia is quite stable because of the legislation, the 15% supply being held for domestic purposes, so that's stable, particularly when you compare it to the rest of the world where gas prices are going through the roof. It's like right now it's a place to build, really, WA on that basis. So we got the gas, which is again clean energy. So you look at carbon emissions, our carbon footprint's lower than global average, certainly lower than a mine, concentrate, smelter, refinery, because we produce the same plate at the end of the day. And our marketplace for cathodes very, very different. Like the marketplace is much broader because you take your copper cathode, you put it into a electric blast arc furnace, and you can manufacture rod, you can manufacture copper tube like for plumbing and air conditioning, or you can manufacture electric cable. And again, I think in the market, that's the other thing that people don't understand, is that you can build and it's like oil and gas. Like you can have as much oil and gas as you like. If you don't have a pipeline to take it to the user, you've got nothing. And here we are, we talk about PV power, wind power, batteries and all those sorts of things. And like the Pilbara in WA, like perfect place for a PV plant, squillion megawatts, whatever you build. How do you get it to Perth? You need a pipe.
Yeah.
And the pipe is called copper cable because the electrons go down the copper cable and it delivers it to the marketplace, which is here, or the manufacturing plant, or to wherever it's going to go. You need copper. And we look at the development in Tasmania where they're going to run that undersea cable into Victoria. That's copper. And I don't think the markets realise that. is that you can build all those things as much as you like, but if you can't run a cable into the area where it's used, it's not going to happen.
This is the battle of precious metals against non-precious metals, where the value of precious metals is the word precious, whereas the non-precious metal, things like copper, there's a function, the utility for it. Right? I think in every business, the utility use tend to go much further than the actual precious value of the commodity. And I think that's the battle people forget, right? It's that, just like the lithium story, right? I mean, lithium's fantastic. Yeah, you're great, and there's going to be a big shortage, the whole story goes, but lithium doesn't exist by itself, right? Everything else, you built more of this, you need more of this, right? We off camera, we were discussing about your presentation, and that one of the points on the ESG factor, because everyone's talking about that, and and as we mature with that narrative, it becomes more succinct in how we understand it. So, but what you were talking about, the difference between what you guys are doing and as opposed to what the traditional guys are doing, there's a big difference in understanding the ESG component. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, well, the reality, I think the reality about it all is that all things contribute to what we're trying to achieve, and we can't. It's very, very difficult to put it succinctly into words. But if you go and have a look at what we try to achieve, we try to achieve a final finished product, and really, like when you produce a copper cathode, an SXEW plant is almost a manufacturing plant. And what do we lack in Australia is manufacturing, right? So at the moment, our economy is dominated by big lumps of bulk rock, concentrate, and whether that's lithium or that's copper or zinc or lead or whatever. And we just produce very, very little metal. And if you look at the carbon emissions footprint of metal, it's much, much less than delivering bulk rock and concentrate and all that, no matter what you do. Because it has to go to a smelter or a refinery, it has to go somewhere else. And commercially, when you look at producing copper cathode, if you can do it, is that it's much more commercially viable anyway. You make more money out of it. And I think part of the problem is in Australia, you actually don't get finance for that innovation. Everyone talks about it, but the fact of the matter is, you go out to a financier and you say, I'm going to do something funky with metallurgy, you don't get financed. But you go out and say, I'm going to dig up bulk rock and I'm going to ship it overseas to a country, you'll get financed like no tomorrow. So, in reality, if we're going to go that path, we need to take responsibility for it and try and back people that are trying to do it properly and not grandstand about it, because we don't grandstand about it, right? We just do it. But Nike, I keep calling it Nike, we just do it. So,
yeah. I mean, I hear people talk, and it's out in the public domain about these ESG funds that go out there and things like that. Have you come across those guys? I mean, it takes time for people to understand concepts, and I think there's a bit of a shell shock period between when interest rates are rising up like no tomorrow, and we're talking about, hey, maybe we're quite there. Are you hearing about these kind of people who are now looking at alternative, like what you've just been describing?
Yeah, they are, and lots of funding in that area. And again, having had a lot of conversations, I think the funding's probably bigger than even I anticipated, and really look like really strict criteria about what they do and don't invest in. And when you look at what we're trying to achieve, we actually tick a lot of those boxes. But again, we don't want to go out there crowing about it, because it becomes a bit of I think it becomes a rod for your back. Like we just go out there and try and create a commercial venture that seems logical within the realms and controls and the outside environment, if you like, of government and the public, the community. there's guidelines and rules and regulations about all that, and you just try and comply with it. But ultimately, you're not doing it for nothing. You're doing it to achieve a commercial outcome for shareholders, for banks, for the community in terms of royalties. And in our minds, if the technology's right, if the innovation's right, and it works, then it'll be commercially more viable anyway. So why pump ourselves up about how good a citizen we are? If it's the right thing to do and it's commercially viable, it'll happen anyway. And really, that's when you look at Nifty, that's really where it's ended up. We didn't go out into Nifty to produce copper metal plate and use gas power and all those sorts of things and think about PV and batteries and all that. We didn't go and do that because, it makes us look good socially. We did it because it was commercially viable, and it turns out that it meets the other criteria. So, nobody goes into business to lose money. And if you do, then you're not in business very long. So ultimately, we've got to get back to the practicalities of just do it. Well, why don't we just do it? So that's all we've done. And as I say, in conversations with investors, when I talk to them like this, they say, "Oh, this is good. You should put some information out there about it." And I sort of say, "Well, we don't really want to because we just feel that we,
grandstanding.
Yeah, and tall poppy and you get cut down, and green scaffolding and all that sort of stuff."
Yeah.
But in this presentation we've just put out, we've put a few slides on that because we've worked out that there are investors out there that want to tick those boxes, which is fine. So there's the information for you can tick those boxes, but don't expect me to stand up and talk about it for 2 hours, because I'm not going to.
Because what you're saying is the practical aspects of what you guys are doing ticks that box anyway. So it's kind of everyday movement, right? It's supposed to. I think that's important. In a lot of times, the new kind of way of doing it takes a bit slower. I think the whole electrification took a while before momentum kicked in and onto the first lot of electrical vehicles started appearing. Then people started jumping on and adopting it, right? Because it's not new. Because when I guess in Nifty, and it was a new approach, and I think that's where a lot of people sort of sat back and go, "Hang on, Nifty had a big history of doing it this way. They didn't do it. The new boys came in with this thing and then saying, oh, we don't need to do all that. We can actually make money from doing this." I think that's where the pushback may have come from. Is that a fair narrative?
Yeah, sort of, except for I don't think the market realises that it was the original way that it was done. Because it's not new. The heap leach SX and AW was the original way it was done, and it was very profitable. So all we've gone back to is the original way it was done. We finance a project, we get the project running, and then we look at alternative ways to do it down the track, not up front, because the original way it was done worked, and we've improved it, and we'll improve it even more, and it'll be much more robust in operation because of the improvements that we can bring to it. But then down the track, when we don't have to have finance and all those sorts of things, we'll actually try and do some innovative things. Because as I said to you, the innovation won't get financed. If I threw a 30-year life of mine plan with innovation in it forward to finance the moment, it won't get financed. You're kidding yourself if you think it will, because there are not risk takers out there in the market who will finance projects like that. They're not there.
In the sense, for your typical investor, they're thinking, okay, they're having issues now because copper prices isn't as what it was, and credit's getting tight. Is that the main problem you are facing at this point in time, or is there something else?
No, not really. So what we're seeing with financiers is that there's a group of financiers that will be or are risk adverse, and any bit of risk they can factor into looking at a project, they will, and consequently they won't finance any projects. And they'll watch the market bubble along. Once it takes direction, they'll change. And we saw that at the previous mine when we were financing that. One or two of the banks, I think we started with a bank pool of like 8 banks, and then one or two of the banks had problems on another job, and then the market took a downturn and half of them just disappear. They just don't do it anymore. And this is the same. But on the other side, there are financiers who are very aggressive, and I actually agree with them. I'm sorry to say, is in this time when there's a downturn, be aggressive, collect up production profile, because the market on copper is going to turn. All we're arguing about is when. I'm a bit more bullish. I think it's going to happen quite quickly. Other parties say next year or the year after, but it's going to turn. And it's the person that's collected up the copper production that's going to take benefit of that. The people sitting on the sidelines will have that much benefit because they haven't got any production. And the aggressive ones are really the ones we're sort of dealing with. But they still need to understand risk. They still need to do documentation and due diligence and all those things. And there's delays happen at this now that never ever happened before. Like as an example, a team member on a legal team gets COVID and they're a week off work, and suddenly, well, we can't do documents for a week because that person's crucial. Like as an example, and people are in multi-storey buildings, so one of them has something happen, then they're not allowed to go to work, and so that never used to happen before. There's just things like that, and it just takes longer.
I think that's a very important point because apart from the guy getting COVID out for a week, you get teams working remotely, and then say, "Oh, I need to pull you in to do things." Whereas before, it's just walk down the corridor and say, "Mate, Jack, you're doing this." Now it's a bit harder, right? So there's a lot of these logistical things that may be small things that in face value, but it actually makes a big deal down the road, So I guess in some, I agree. I think the copper pricing, the need for copper, this base metal stuff, is probably closer than most people think. And if we mentioned earlier on in this video, is if you don't have the inventory, inventory just doesn't pop up, And I'm very bullish on your other projects, and we could be talking for hours on those things. But the inventory is what counts today, and infrastructure, and when you're starting at a starting point and one's financing, the signs for the financiers to start pulling the funds for you for projects like this, you will be bolting out of the gates, right? And that's how it always is, every single time, right? It doesn't take a genius to see it. It's people, unfortunate people with white hair and no hair are the ones that have said, well, that's what happened here and there. And I think that's where investors should look at, right? And is that the guys that has all those inventories will be the one that moves first, and the guys that, man, I've been many occasions when I'm an investor of a small cap and they go, "Oh, it hasn't floated down yet," the money hasn't floated down yet.
No, well, as I say, if the copper price rises and runs, like lithium has, then the only way you make money out of that is to produce copper metal at the time and sell it into that rising price. You don't make money because you've got a big resource base.
Correct. Yeah. Or potential.
Maybe you'll get a market cap kick, but as I said, are we in the market for the market cap kick, or are we in the market to make money and maybe give a dividend to shareholders? Well, as a founder with a group of people of this company, that's what we got into it for. We got into it to make a commercial return and pay a dividend. That's really what we got it in for. Market cap you need, obviously, for raising funds and all those sorts of things, but it's not the be-all and end-all of what a copper developer's about. A copper developer's about developing projects and producing copper plate and making money when the copper price goes for the run. The other thing too, a couple of little anecdotes for you, and if you don't believe me, do the maths yourself, all right? I had a look at, because the whole electrification market's intriguing, I think. I had a look at the metal content of a vehicle, and had a look at the amount of steel, the amount of aluminium, the amount of copper in it, and did some rough numbers. If I double the price of steel, the cost of that car goes up $2,000 US per unit. If I double the price of aluminium, the cost of that car goes up $1,000 per unit. If I double the cost of copper, the price of that car goes up $90 US. So if I'm sitting there and I'm trying to buy a car, and someone says to me, that's going to cost you $2,000 more, I'll go and look for another car. If someone says 90 bucks, 100 bucks, oh, just buy it. So you see the difference with copper. But the key then is the copper's in everything. It's in your phone, it's in your cameras, it's in your sound system, it's in your electric cable, it's in the car. Every battery I've ever looked at's got a couple of copper connectors hanging out of it. And you have a look at battery technology, and I keep saying it, if you want to look at battery technology, compare it to floppy disks. Remember the old floppy disks? Go and have a look at the history of floppy disks. It's a 10-year cycle, that's all it is. Right now, there's companies that are reducing the amount of lithium in batteries. They're producing batteries without graphite. They're reducing the nickel and cobalt in batteries. And that's what technology does. It's like the zinc market. Zinc coatings get thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. So when the price goes up, technology takes over. It either replaces it or reduces it. Copper, you still need the cable. Because to get the electrons to flow through the copper cable, it's still got to be that round. And you can't do anything about that. It's called physics and chemistry, or it's physics. The electrons flow, and if that's too small, it heats up and it'll burn out. So it's got to be a particular size. And that, in this whole electrification thematic, is the only consistency, is the copper cable and the copper connectors. The rest of it, I think, because it's new technology, be like the floppy disks. We started like that, 250 kilobytes. We got down to that at 2 meg, remember that? And then someone came up with a CD, and now it's a pen drive that does 1 tera. That's battery technology in my mind. That's where it's going to go, because we're smart people. That's where we'll end up. But that, whether the battery's that big or the battery's as big as this, it still needs a copper cable to deliver it to your house.
It's just like the mobile phone, technology.
Yep.
It was a brick, and then now it's a mini computer.
Yep.
Right, and then, you know, with the flip screen, you know, who knows where it's going to go.
Yep.
And that hasn't changed. Well, that's changed so much in such a little time, I should say.
Well, remember the brick? And what was the battery in that brick? Do you remember the battery in the brick? The Nokia battery?
Yeah.
Tantalum. Where's that gone? Disappeared.
In the museum, probably.
Yeah, remember Nokia was one of the biggest companies in the world when the mobile started, and the flip Nokias and all that. How quickly did that disappear?
Yeah.
I mean, I was working in Kalgoorlie at the time when I first got my first car phone, which was like that big. It was like a brick. And as you say now, you know, like they're only the size they are because we want a fancy camera on them. If they're just a phone, they're like that big. If you just get a phone, it's only that big. Yeah. And that's batteries.
And there's the classic, I think, is the phone in the car. That was the thing, right? And then suddenly they realized that you don't need a phone in the car. You can actually carry the phone with you.
It is. And that's technology, and it accelerates. And but as I say, you still need the electrons. You still need the copper cable to deliver the electrons to whatever you're delivering it to. So like that's our view, right? Well, that's not our view. That's my view. But the other bit about where we are and what we're trying to achieve, and I'm going to rob the wise words from our chairman, our venerable chairman, Gary. And we talked about this earlier. In these circumstances, in these conditions in the market, there's only a few projects get going. And I was talking to a broker analyst about this, I think last year, and he said the same thing. You know, like you go and review 20, 30, 40, 50 projects. They go through this type of cycle. Only 2 or 3 of them, as in Gary's words, get off the beach. And they then, as we say, go on to become a mid-tier company, and you can follow the history of all of them. And then the rest are all lining up in 5 years' time trying to achieve the same thing. And that really has been part of our strategy. So we grab resources, we grab quality assets in quality regions, what we think are quality regions. We apply our experience, our technology, whatever we can apply to get them to that starting line. And right now we're financing to get off the beach. And once we get off the beach and we're generating cash, then our destiny is in our own hands. And that's really what the drive has been all along. And as a group, as a board, and as an executive team, that's been our drive. We understand that when you're producing cash flow, a lot of these issues we talk about today about, you know, delays in this and delays in that, that's taken longer than usual, the market's bad. It doesn't matter to you, because when you're making cash flow and you're commercial, you can carry on doing what you need to do. And that's really been the driver for us. regardless of outside influences. And as I said, being copper bulls, certainly very, very aware that sooner or later that copper market's going to pop.
I think from a investor point of view, and I was a believer in, at 46 million market cap. It was about 3 times your market cap when I bought your shares, and all I'm thinking of is being, and then on the other shoe where you've looked at projects, oh yeah, those guys will fall over, we'll be able to pick it up cheap. But I have never come across a situation where I had that thought and the result was what I thought it was going to be, because it just hangs on, and then the market turns and they're flying, right? And that's where I feel Cyprium is, without being, trying to put financial advice into people's head. That's where I'm thinking my head is. For me, it's all about averaging out. It's cheap to buy it at 40 million today when I was buying it at 120 million and things like that. With that in mind, what is the step forward for you guys, as for guys like myself who are shareholders and things? So what's the step forward?
The number one focus is on ticking all the boxes that we're required to tick for the financiers, whether it's legal or commercial or whatever, and to get the finance completed, sign the docs, get the money in the bank and start work. That's the finance is our number one focus. As I said, some of our technical people are now trying to tidy up some of the data and stuff that we've done over the last 2 years that we really haven't tidied up. They're trying to tidy that up, but generally the focus of the executive team is all around getting the finance done. And quite rightfully, there shouldn't be any other focus but get finance done, however or whatever we need to do to get it done.
And would that effectively be the news flow path as well for on that front?
Yeah, look, that's the number one thing. As the data becomes available on some of the other projects, like the Nifty thing, we'll put a release out, because we have to keep the market informed, because there's lots more outstanding data that we've got to do something with and get it out in the market.
Yeah.
If it's like not market sensitive, if it's like relevant, to keep the market informed.
Continuous disclosure.
Yeah. So if it needs to be disclosed, we'll disclose it. If it's irrelevant, we won't.
Yep.
And we're still working on the Nifty resource, because we've still got outstanding drilling there. I don't think that work will see a resource upgrade. What I think it'll see is the guys, the crew, because it's guys and girls. In fact, one of the leader of that crew is actually a lady. So. Sorry, Mandy. So the crew can target what they have to do next for that resource. So like they'll probably get say an inferred resource or something out of it, and then they get the infill and all that. But it's still open and it's still going to extend to the east. There's still work to do in the west. We've still got splits to do on that Nifty work, like where we got those broad expanses of that. Mineralisation, the copper nickel PGE mineralisation, there's still splits to be done on that. So and there's some quite potentially on that basal contact, there could potentially be some quite reasonable grade narrow zones of that material, but we just don't know. So there's lots of work. There's a Maroochydore work to do. The team, again, the crew has been doing a lot of surface mapping work and that while they're in and out of there. So they've got to compile that. There's a lot of IGO data we've got from the JV, because they've been spending money, obviously. IGO themselves are going to be doing some diamond drilling into our tenements as well. And we've got a few other things happening. So as that information becomes available, we'll release it, but the focus will be the finance, and you won't need a release because you'll hear me yahoo once the finance is done. You'll hear it right through Perth, if that's where I am at the time. And I mean, just in summary, like, this is nothing different from what we've told people for 3 years. And again, I don't understand about when people, because I get a lot of shareholders ring me and say, we're with you all the way, why is the share price like it is? But we understand it's a long-term strategy, and that we park our shares in the top drawer, and you're going to be a producer, and the dividend or whatever we're going to do is going to come, the project's going to come, and the market will respond after that point, as invariably it does, always late. And to some people I say, like, when you look at your share portfolio and your Cyprium shares, you only crystallise a loss if you sell it. And then you're basically a victim of your own prediction. And why would you do that?
The guy that's trying to sell is a bit upset with you now.
Well, you do. You only crystallise a loss when you sell.
Yeah.
So if you've bought Cyprium shares as a long-term investment strategy into a copper portfolio, why do you even look at the ticker or something in some real? Because I don't, and I can't sell. I can't buy either, but I can't sell. And you know, and I've paid money for my shares as well. But again, I'm not an investment advisor. You know, and I tell you the truth, I'm not a fan of the market at the moment. I think some people should go down to the racetrack on Tuesday and throw their money at the Melbourne Cup, because that's what they're doing.
Or download the Sportsbet app.
That's right. Well, you have a quaddie, do the quaddie. But yeah, look, we'll it'll be what it is. We'll pursue our strategy. We're at the go line on the project. We get the finance in the bank, and then we'll go and build it. And again, it's only a 12-month build. So, you know, we managed to get going in January. We're finished building, commissioning December. We're full production January 24. How quick is that? You tell me another developer can do that in that time. There isn't one.
I think in summary, I think what Warren Buffett preaches is that he buys businesses. He doesn't buy companies that are on the stock market. It just happens that the business is on the stock market, and I think that's what you're trying to message out to people is that you're going to happen. It's just a matter of when, and you'll still be around until the turn. And I think I get that. I that's where I see you guys, and I think, you know, if you're share price focused, which most investors are, you know, averaging down is a good thing, because it's just, you thought it was a great idea at 22 cents. At 6 cents is even better idea if you believe that the fundamentals hasn't changed. That's the way I see it, I think. And I think you guys, I mean, look, Barry's, you know, you've just stepped off a one-to-one meeting where you were saying you had 32 meetings all up.
31 meetings, yeah.
So
good.
Reach out to Barry. I think, you know, I think those conferences are good to get people to talk and understand what you try and do with us here on Coffee with Samso. It's very in-depth, and I hope you guys, you know, people do watch it all. I think it's that conversation that most of the guys out there don't get an opportunity to get that kind of conversation with yourself. Any last words to go? Any takeaways that people should bring with them at this point in time?
No, not really. I mean, I've probably said it all. I've looked at the market, and in a personal sense, I've made investments around a number of things over the last, say, 4 years. Initially, personally, I went into the iron ore, which we're all very happy with and got big dividends, and you see that's coming off. Most recently, I went into coal and gas, and you see that where that's going at the moment. Yep. The old stock standard commodities, they're not specialty or anything like that, they're just stock standard commodities. Yeah, bricks and mortar. Steel went, coal's going, gas is going, copper hasn't gone. Yeah. And copper's the bellwether metal. It's the bellwether metal. So, and I'm not saying to you go and invest in Cyprium Metals. What I'm saying is, in my portfolio, looking to the future right now, is I'm thinking copper. That's what's in my mind. That's what drives me. That's why I want to build and produce copper, because I think that the copper's got to be the next thing, because it's so integral to the whole thematic of where we are at the moment. It is so integral to the whole thing. And as I said, you don't have to invest in Cyprium Metals to get into copper, but you know, that's probably the summary for me. And we've positioned Cyprium Metals to take advantage of that if it occurs, and that's all we can do. because everything else is outside our control. As I said, someone writing a cheque for finance is outside my control. The price of the metal's outside my control. The price of the Aussie dollar's outside my control. All Cyprium Metals can do is position itself against a strategy that it's communicated to its shareholders. And whether you like it or not, that's what we've done. And we've got 1.6 million tonne of resource. We've got a copper development project that's just rating for finance, and all our resources are open. If we were a larger like Rio Tinto, we'd have 6 rigs on all of those, and we'd be 4 million tonne of copper in 12 months. But that's not what we do, because the difficulty for us is that we're small, and you can't do that. But what we've got the tiger by the tail. And at the moment, it's trying to get its teeth into us, but we'll beat it. And do not underestimate the location of our assets in terms of tier 1 location. Do not underestimate it. We've got the tiger by the tail. We fight pretty well. I can't walk on water, but I can swim really well. Right? So that's all we're doing. We're just going to keep going. We'll get there eventually. However long it takes, and then we'll go and build it. We'll produce copper, then we're master of our own destiny, and we'll go and build more with 2, 3, 4, 5. That's always been the aim, that's always been the strategy, and we will execute it. Hold your breath.
Good way to finish. As Confucius say, because this is the year to target. By January, end of January, tiger's gone, Cyprium's going to go through the roof.
That's very prophetic. I'm glad you said that. I'm actually happy now. That's a sign.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that. Is it Year of the Tiger?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Well, that's
so when you said the tiger,
yeah, that's
I
a
thought,
sign.
this is great. I'm going to finish with this.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Please finish with that. No, that's brilliant. Oh, right.
Anyway,
I'm happy now. It's going to be done before Christmas.
So I've got a happy.
And if it's not, I'm going to blame Noel.
So I've got a happy Barry.
Yep.
Coffee to go with you.
Fantastic.
Courtesy of Florence Drummond and the Indigenous women in Mining Australia, Resource Australia, and the Jaja Group. I think I pronounced it properly.
Jala.
Yeah. So for you to take, and Barry,
you.
thank you for your time, and look for the end of the year to Tiger, mate.
Yes, fantastic.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Thanks for your time again. Thank you.